Fantastic. Well, welcome, folks. Future Work Scotland. It's good to be back. We've had a short summer break, which is a kind of recent tradition because we normally used to do a session throughout the year. But Donald and I agreed we would take the summer break and have done the last couple of years. So it's great to be back. It's good to have you back. And if this is your first time with us, very warm welcome to you. If you've been here before, well, welcome back. As you probably know, if you've been here before, we have a very straightforward, simple code of conduct by design. We simply ask you to be respectful to one another. We want everyone to have a great learning experience. So if we could just bear that all in mind throughout the session, and we will do our usual community shout outs, etc. at the end. We've been busy building the remainder of the programme for the year. So we've got some exciting updates for you if you haven't already seen them. Before we get into tonight's session, unfortunately, I do have a little bit of sad news that we felt was appropriate to share. For those of you who may remember or have been joining our sessions over past years, some years ago, a young lady by the name of Barbara used to be part of our organising team and supported Donald and I. Sadly, we recently learnt that Barbara had tragically passed away, and we were very sad and sorry to hear that. Barbara was a very smiley, lively human being, and she will certainly be sadly missed by I think many across the communities that we all inhabit, certainly in central Scotland, and I'm sure absolutely by her family and friends. So our best wishes go out to her family and friends, and at this particularly difficult time. So we just wanted to take a moment to share that with you all, as she was previously part of this organising team at Future Work Scotland. So, on to tonight's session. I am delighted to welcome a very good friend of this meetup, a close friend of ours, has been for many years, a supporter of our community group, and has been also our sponsor for quite some years. So, a warm welcome to Martin Hinshelwood. If you don't know Martin, and Martin's somebody whose work I've admired for many, many years. Martin, I would class as a thought leader in the engineering space. He has been doing this stuff, whatever we think stuff is. For him, that's many different things. For quite some years, he's been a Microsoft MVP for many, many years, which is something I've always admired. He's also a trainer of Scrum and Kanban. Donald and I have had the privilege of sitting in on some of his Scrum or classes over the years. And these days, I think he focuses a lot on helping organizations to design their systems of work. And as we will unpack today, see leadership, see engineering as a leadership system. So Donald and I are holding up copies of this great book. It's quite the read. We're both still working through it. But it's very insightful and thought-provoking, which is exactly what I would come to expect from Martin. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome our good friend Martin to take the stage. Martin, very warm welcome to you. This is going to be a pleasant, surprising session.
You've bigged me up a little bit, maybe too much. I just fake it till I make it like everybody else, right? I mean, that's the difficulty of doing the things that we do is that everything is different all of the time. Regardless of whether you're doing business stuff or my most of my background has been engineering and DevOps, although with people, which I was always very upset about because I started working with computers because then I didn't have to work with people, right? And then you end up working with people anyway because drat, they use computers. So yeah, I've been a Microsoft MVP for 19 years now. Yeah, it's I don't know why they keep giving it to me, but they seem to keep doing it. For those that don't know, it's like Microsoft give an award every year for being loud and obnoxious in a particular category. And my category is DevOps and GitHub. I think sometimes it's DevOps, sometimes it's DevOps and GitHub. Just depends how they feel in a particular year. But yeah, speaking at conferences and helping people out and doing stuff. That's always been. I think that's always been my bag, Seth. I think even when I was an employee back in the old days, that was always my thing, was helping people out. So I guess what Sath's kind of hit. I'm trying to figure out. I'm talking while I'm trying to figure out how to share again in this tool of madness. There we go. Not that one. This one. As you can tell, not a Zoom user. So there we go. Anyway, um, so this book kind of came from all of the things that I've been noticing and writing about over the last 20 years. I think I started my blog in 2006, although if you go back to those posts, they're pretty bad. Pretty bad. I don't recommend them. But dealing with lots of different organizations has helped me maybe see what I think is an issue. And I'm not saying that nobody else has seen it, but I feel like it's not called out enough. And I think the last talk I did here was on the similar idea, but my ideas on this topic have refined a lot over the years since I did that talk. And what we're talking about here is engineering as a leadership system. And I'm going to explain that, but I want to get to something first, and that's that we've all been down this road so many times. As a consultant, I've been down this road probably more times than other people who are not consultants, but some of you are probably consultants as well. I heard from one of my customers that they have transformation fatigue. They've been through 3 or 4 large scale everybody must do it transformations across their organization, and every single time everything drops back to the way it was before. You have a big effort, money spent, training delivered, new frameworks implemented, and everything's grand for it could be months in some cases, years in other cases, and then things just drop back to the way they've always been. And I think fundamentally, that this is happening across the board. There are very few organizations that the change has stuck, or stuck beyond maybe the personality that helped implement it. Sath, you're one of those personalities, right? You create change in your organization, and as soon as you're not looking, it kind of wanes and disappears a little bit. So this idea, second transformation, third operating for fourth reorg, right? This is kind of happening time and time again. And now AI's come along and kind of changed the game a little bit, but we're still fundamentally playing by the same rules. It's just changed the tempo. Maybe that's probably a better way to explain it. It's changed the tempo, and things are going a little bit faster. And I guess the question with all of this change and all of this effort over the last, what, 20, 30, 40 years, Tom's here, so I know he's been at this for quite a significant amount of time. What's the outcome in most organizations? Is everything as everything was claimed to be after every one of these attempts? Things are faster, more consistent, and cheaper to change. Is that actually the outcome we got out of all of this? I'd argue not. That's not what we got. I think you'd be hard pushed to find. I have a list of orgs that have managed to make substantial change and make it stick. But we're yet to see whether the personality that made the change leaves and it keeps. But the idea I want to present is that frameworks cannot overcome the operating model they run inside. They just can't. If like I said, you can get that. There's a force of personality, there's some kind of initiative, there's a bunch of money thrown at something. You can get a temporary and usually local optimization. right? A department gets better, a department gets faster, but it seems to all settle back to the way it was before. And that's my belief is because the operating model doesn't change. And this isn't going to be about product operating model. For me, that's just an instantiation of this idea. And that again may or may not stick in your org. Um, so I think it comes down to a bunch of things. Um, but this idea of engineering as a leadership system kind of cuts two ways. Um, and I do absolutely mean both of those ways. The first one is engineering the function is a leadership system. Its performance is produced by structures leaders own. Right? If leadership sucks, I was in an organization recently and everything was awesome, or trending towards awesome and getting better, and people were engaged and things were happening, and then one bad hire in the leadership system and the entire thing is destroyed, and now very few of the people are left in the all of the people that were significantly skilled in the organization, the capability they had, are gone because they were hounded out of the organization by new leadership model, right? And we'll all have seen that as well. So that's one function. Engineering is a leadership system, um, and it's formed by those structures that leaders own, not by team practices. We can work on team practices and we can help teams. That's easy, but it doesn't stick unless the leaders own it. And the second one is the leadership system is the thing that needs engineered. So the application of the way we look at engineering on the organization. So not the code, not the product, the company itself. The operating model is an engineered artifact, right? It's designed by somebody. It might not be deliberately designed, but it's designed by somebody or groups of people, under assumptions that were maybe true at the time. And I'm saying maybe true because I have my doubts on whether they were true. And it it deserves what any engineering system deserves. We need instrumentation. We need testing against reality. It needs maintenance, refactoring when its assumptions expire. And almost nobody is maintaining this thing. Almost nobody. I don't think. Have I seen a single? I'm not sure I've been part of a single organization or worked with a single organization that is actively maintaining it. Oh, maybe one. But my judgment is colored by the fact that I'm a consultant and companies hire me when they're in a bad way, right? So we tend to have a negative view. I'm sure Tom's the same, right? You come in and you always see bad things in orgs, but it's because that's who hires us to come and help them fix things. Um, so that I think I don't deserve any of the kudos for this idea. I think it all lies in the hands of Peter Drucker. And he coined an idea many moons ago, more than 30 or more moons ago, called the theory of business. And he said that every organization runs on this idea of a theory of business. And in this context, a theory of business is the assumptions about the environment that the organization exists in, who the customer is, what they value, and what we must be good at to win as a company. Right? That's Drucker's theory of business, and those assumptions may or may not be correct. But most organizations just pick stuff and run with it. Quite often, you don't pick stuff, you just inherit it. You inherit these assumptions that you have to deal with in the organization. Um, I would also suggest that in many organizations, the theory of business actually never matched the environment that the organization was in the first place. I'm gonna talk about two, and I talk about it in the book as well. Two categories of um, operating models. One is predictive operating models that are based on knowing what's going to happen. You A whole bunch of assumptions based on knowing what's going to happen, and then adaptive operating models, which are based on not knowing what's going to happen. You don't know what the future is going to hold. And most organizations, almost all organizations in the world, exist in an adaptive environment. And almost all organizations in the world use predictive assumptions. So there's a fundamental mismatch. And one of the reasons that nobody notices, or it doesn't seem like anybody notices, is that all of the companies have this mismatch. So they're not looking at a competitor and going, why are you doing so much better than everybody else? Because they don't exist, because they're existing under the same faulty assumptions. So it's effectively become institutional. And I don't mean in our industry, I mean in all industries. There are very few industries left in the world that you could consider were predictive. 150 years ago, if you were a paper mill in, well, let's say a textile mill in Livingston, right? Because that's just down the road. If you were a textile mill in Livingston, you weren't competing with cheap textiles in India. You weren't competing with cheap textiles from China. You didn't have those competitors. Your market was fairly stable. It was fairly long term, and you didn't really have to talk to your customers because they just accepted whatever you gave them, right? That's a predictive world. We can plan for the long term. We can know what's going to happen. Not a lot is changing. So those assumptions result in the operating model that we choose. That's the governance, the funding, the measures, the decision rights, the accountability that we create within the organization. That's the operating model. And you'll see there's a bunch of works out there, people talking about how do we start changing the operating model, right? So the product operating model, Marty Kagan's product operating model. And I would argue that we're not going far enough because we're not dealing with the underlying assumptions that create the operating model. So things will still fall back to the way they've always been. I mentioned and that structure, that operating model, then we decide on processes and practices. And almost all of the work that at least I've been involved in over the last 20 years working with organizations that were or were not transforming is around processes and practices. We're going to do a bunch of Scrum training and help them do Scrum, or we're going to do Kanban and help them do Kanban. We're going to bring in a bunch of engineering practices. It's going to be DevOps. It's whatever the story is. That's the processes and practices that have effectively the smallest impact in the grand scheme of things because the structure is still forcing us down this other route. That's what I'm talking about. Whereas what we should be doing is when we see those processes and practices that we think should be working or not working in the organization, we need that feedback loop all the way back to the assumptions upon which our operating model is based and make adaptations to those assumptions. Right? And then see that impact through the organization. And this is much longer term, much more difficult, which is why very few organizations are on my list that have been able to achieve it. Most well-known one, you'll all know Toyota in the 50s, made massive changes to their assumptions about what the customer wants, how they had to interact with their customer, how they did business completely, and they turned around something that they couldn't out mass produce Detroit, but they managed to build a much more effective business that now all of those, well, now for a long time, all of those other people in that industry have coveted those ideas. Hire is another one. I don't know if you've seen any of the stories around how Hire has changed the way they work, and that's a fundamental. Their incoming CEO made a change for zero distance to the user. Was their main assumption that they changed, and rebuilt the entire structure of the organization, every operating model, every surface of their organization around that story. And even IBM under Gressner, Microsoft under Satya Nadella have made lots of massive changes across the organization. While I'm not saying that they're Austin poster childs of anything, right? They've fundamentally shifted their operating model by fundamentally shifting their theory of business into something that maybe meets things a little bit better. So how do you know where you are? I'm creating these two categories. Yes, I realize that they're polarizing. It's kind of deliberate. I consider them mutually exclusive, and I'm not excluding any predictive practices in an adaptive world. Does that maybe make sense? So if you remember from the this diagram, the processes and practices are right at the top level. So it's absolutely fine for an organization that is fundamentally built on assumptions that are adaptive for them to use traditional project management practices within a context that it makes sense. What's very difficult for organizations is the other way around. Is if you're in a predictive assumption model, you're in a predictive operating model, it's very difficult to go against the grain and do something adaptive within that context. That's the bit we typically are fighting against, and why it drops back to predictive when really we want adaptive. So my thinking is that all organizations in every industry everywhere should be building on adaptive assumptions and then using whatever practices make sense within that context, but dropping back to adaptive, i.e., we're going to be able to change what it is that we're able to do. We're able to close those feedback loops. We're able to change our assumptions because we understand we're in the adaptive world. Does that kind of make sense as a fundamental difference between those two models? So that the way you would maybe, apart from the lists I have of the describe the different models, a key way I tend to think about how you can tell the difference is when your budget process and your team's learning collide, who wins? When a team says this isn't working, but the budget says I've put money for this, who wins? Invariably, it's the budget wins in an organization. Great. I was teaching a Scrum class for product managers in an automotive company, and I spoke to. They were talking about a change in their theory of business that they had made as an organization for a particular reason. And that was that on their production line, making cars, there was a machine that was getting old, was starting to be faulty, and wasn't producing correct output, and was likely to result in recalls. And it was a 10 million pound, dollar, whatever, 10 million peso machine, 10 million whatever's machine that they had to replace. So the person on the line who understood the problem best did all of the things they were supposed to do. They did the business case, they fought for it, they got it pushed up the chain in the organization, and it got up the chain to somebody who decided, because it wasn't in their budget for this year, denied because it wasn't in their budget for this year. And that resulted in nearly $1 billion worth of recall costs to the company for a $10 million machine. So they changed the rules in the organization that it's post-moderation rather than pre-moderation now. So instead of having to get approval to spend the money, you spend the money and then you get approval afterwards that you were valid in spending the money. And that fundamentally shifts that from predictive to an adaptive philosophy underlying the things that you do, and then you're able to make much more better decisions across the organization within that context because you've changed that budgeting is one of the core things that gets in our way, right? And change that core relationship between the people and the budget, and how we discover what is valuable for the company and able to adapt. So while you can run Scrum within a predictive model, it tends to be adapted to the predictive model, but you can run project management within an adaptive model and have something that does result in positive outcomes even within that context. You're not going to have this problem if you look at your world and there's a core. There are, in order to even start addressing this problem, you need to have good people, right? Skills, knowledge, experience. And if you don't have that, that's probably the problem you should focus on first, not changing your entire organization, because you're not going to get the benefits. You're better with the rules, the predictive rules that you have within the organization. But if you have highly skilled, motivated, organized people, then that's you probably make some progress. And you want to have answers backed by evidence. I'm not going to tell you which way your organization should go. I'm saying I don't think there's any predictive environments left in the world, but that doesn't mean your company doesn't exist in one. That's up to you to go figure out. Look at the what I'm presenting and see what version matches up with the reality of my organization. So effectively, what I'm saying is that a framework is something you adopt, but the theory of business is something you typically inherit. None of you probably made the decision about the theory of business for your organization. It was either pre-decided when your organization started or just grew up over time. And often there are things that influence it, like capitalization rules that, like, when I mentioned budget, Sath was nodding there as, as one of the bigger problems. Even capex opex treatment can fundamentally shift what you're able to do. So there are kind of 5 surface areas that I think are really important for that operating model decision: governance, funding, measurement, decision rights, and accountability. And they manifest through a number of, I have them as theories in the book, but one of them is decision testability. When can you test your decisions? Can you test them before they're finalized or only after they're finalized? So in most predictive organizations, a decision is made, budget is allocated, and now you cannot change that decision, even if you find out it's a big crock of crap, and you have to move forward and deliver that thing anyway. Has anybody been in that position? I have some very interesting defense company stories around that. It's really, really, really common. So decision testability is the ability to validate a decision against reality before commitment becomes irreversible. Right? That Sathpal, you probably remember from the book, the untestable decision. Right? If you can't test it and you're making the decision, that's probably the wrong time to be making that decision. Right? Because we don't have enough information to test it. The next one I tend to focus on is where economic ownership lies. That's where this other company did post-moderation rather than pre-moderation of their budget. But the reality is budgeting and planning for projects gets you the plan. Budgeting a product gets you a capability, right? Something the product does. But if you're able to focus on outcomes, that can transcend product and deliver things of real value for your organization. The example I like best for that is around Microsoft. They changed their, depends who you work with at Microsoft, but if you work with their engineering people, they're very good at this. And that's they focus on the value proposition that they're trying to achieve, and the product is irrelevant. I'm also not saying they make good decisions, but they make decisions and follow through on them. Right? Everybody's familiar with Copilot, Clippy Mark II, right? But this idea of they work on a season-based model, which is about 6 months is a season. They look about 3 seasons out, so they're looking about 18 months out for the futures. But the season's goal is very high level. So they had one a few years ago, which was the creators. They had the result was the creators update, but the effective thing was make creators raving fans was a corporate ethos that they were trying to work towards, a company goal, and that goal went across products. So it impacted pen, surface screens, pressure on the surface screen, the app reading that pressure all the way through into the operating system to be able to read that into applications that are running on top of it to be able to leverage that. So that's a company goal, funded and more important than the individual product budget. So it impacts across all of the products in the organization, the whole company working together towards a common goal, the very definition of team, right? We're working together towards a common goal. So that economic ownership is a really important piece. The next one is signal integrity. Are you making decisions based on reality or made up stuff? You'll one of the things that we always talk about in product management, Scrum.org's product management courses, is that in order for Scrum to work, you have to have transparency, right? That's the first fundamental pillar of Scrum. But you can't get transparency without trust. If nobody trusts anybody, they're not going to tell anybody the real information, what's really going on, how's this really going, what's really happening. And they're going to say whatever they need to get by, not get punished, right? So you can't do anything without that transparency, and that's not just true for Scrum. That's true across the board. You need to be able to see what's going on. I worked with an organization in the US. They had I think Tom, you will like this. They had a report that went up through management that had for each of the 5 major projects of the year, original estimate and actual in hours for their projects. Sath, you'll remember these graphs. And all of the my first suspicion was all of the 5 projects were within 20%, right? That was my first suspicion. 3 of them were within 10%, and 1 of them was dead on. And I kid you not, it was like 6,438 hours estimated, 6,438 hours actual. And I just turned it round to the leader and said, "But this is bullcrap. What's going on? How did this happen?" And he said, "Well, last year management came down on us for there being so much difference between the estimates. So we created a system where the project managers can create a change request to their original estimate. And that project manager managed to finish their project before we finished the graph. Therefore, he got his change request in before." So it wasn't original versus actuals at all. It was just actuals versus actuals at that point in time. These types of things, this organization is making budgetary decisions based on made up data, right? They're making decisions on what products to fund and what products not to fund based on made up data. It's not good. You need to be able to see what's going on. You need to be able to have that transparency of those signals. 4 out of 5 is decision latency. Do we have the information that we need in a timely manner? Right? Are we able to? Has our system baked in decision latency by design? Right? Are we ever able to make decisions with the information that we need to make decisions? And quite often, this happens because there's because of the next one, which is a discrepancy between where decisions are made and who can make the decision, who has the information to make the decision, and who can actually make the decision. And that one is authority alignment. Is there alignment between who can actually decide. And again, back to the example of the machine that was faulty. Why couldn't the person on the floor make the decision to spend the 10 million? Right? That change is a authority alignment change. And where authority resides, accountability without authority is rampant in most organizations I've ever worked with. Loads of people are accountable for outcomes, but they don't have the authority to change anything that matters to get to that outcome. Yeah, it comes with centralized context, distributed blame. That's always a good one as well. Um, you have this centralized knowledge locally to people who aren't making the decisions, and they're going to blame everybody else for the outcomes because that's the blast radius. So why so little sticks is because this operating model is forcing um, forcing the issue towards the original theory of business. Does that does that make sense? I think that makes sense. So the constraint is not the layer above the work, it actually wraps it. So our teams doing the work have the least impact to change the overall system. The frameworks and training and coaching that we've been doing for years does make a difference. It tends to be local optimizations. It tends to not go very far, and it tends to not last very long because the operating model then pushes it back. We need, and I know, Sath, you've been working on some of these things in your orgs, looking at actual, like, how do we do budgets? How are we structured? What are the policies? Who has the decision rights to be able to create better alignments so that we can do things a little bit better? But if we're still, remember, wrapping the whole thing, if we're still bucking up against that theory of business, which is at odds with what we're trying to do, it's a predictive theories of business rather than adaptive theories of business, it can be very difficult to make those changes, and you get lots and lots of pushback, and it's an uphill battle, and you need somebody with the force of personality like Sath or Tom or probably Richard and Mark to actually make it happen. And then as soon as you're not looking, it falls back to the old ways. And AI is starting to accelerate the identification of this problem, because it's changing the focus of where the work fundamentally is. Before AI, writing the actual code was a significant amount of time we would spend on things. I know there are lots of people not writing good code with AI. I definitely understand that. And vibe coding is just, building apps without any tests or safety harness. Totally with you there. But if you're using AI responsibly, you have human in the loop. You're using spec-driven development practices where you're developing that for the execution by the AI, then you can shrink the execution window pretty heavily around code. It's not to zero. You're still interacting. You're still humans are doing a lot of the instructing and directing, but you can shrink it. So that wait time is becoming the biggest problem, not a hidden problem that you can hide behind poor practices around coding and engineering, and you're not building the code fast enough, and there's a lot of time spent there. So AI doesn't compensate for this. It actually multiplies the problem. It makes it much harder. It makes it much harder to adapt. It makes it much harder to change because things start moving at a faster pace. And I'm seeing that now much more even than last year in organizations where they're really struggling to adopt AI, to understand how it impacts their way of working, and then even to actually use it the way we should be using it, because the organization is saying, no, we can't move that fast. Right? We can't make those changes. We can't do this. We can't do that. It's much more prevalent. So this tells just some little tells, so when you're in one of these organizations, when we've all been there. We're asking for empowered teams, but decisions above a certain amount of money wait till some board meets, right? These are all probably things that you see a lot. I know Tom and I in the engineering space work a lot with quality, and when the date is the only thing that matters, then quality just goes out the window. Right? It's very difficult to maintain a level of quality in the product when nobody above the people doing the work cares one jot about quality because it's about hitting those dates. And this just allows us to see what's going on, because there's an old adage that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I would suggest that regardless of what it is, the structure wins. Your theory of business results in your operating model, and your operating model eats your culture for breakfast. That I would kind of phrase it a little bit differently. Your operating model is the shadow on the wall that results from your operating model. Your culture is the shadow on the wall from your operating model. That's what creates the culture that you have. It defines the metrics, it defines the way people are able to work within the system, and that's what defines your culture, which is why it's so difficult to change culture, because we're not focused on the thing that actually influences it, which is the underlying theory of business through into that operating model. So I'm gonna skip that. Oh, that's actually not what I wanted. This is. So I've got maybe 5 questions for your next leadership meeting, things that you can ask. What are the permissions actually buying us? Right? Each permission that is given in the organization was actually by us, and who makes those decisions? What's the cost of that decision latency? What's the cost of that misalignment of authority? How do we get funding? I'm a firm believer in beyond budgeting as a key differentiator that organizations can start to look at. It's an instantiation of that different theory of business, right? So that's why organizations find it so difficult. They read beyond budgeting, they read about it, they internalize it, and they think, oh yes, this would be awesome if only we could implement it. But the reason they can't implement it is because they haven't looked at their theory of business. They're still in that predictive mindset. Yeah, permission debt. So measurements, like how often do you see measurements within organizations being used and influenced positively, or how often do you see them resulting in fear in the organization? Almost every organization I've worked in, they pick metrics based usually on quantity of stuff being delivered rather than value, and they often pick metrics so they can. There's a thing we do in the West is we pick metrics, we look for who messed up so we can mess them up, rather than looking at what the problem is. That's tends to be in Japanese culture. They tend to look for what's the problem and how do we solve it, whereas in our culture we tend to look for who messed up and how do we get rid of them. Right? That's the scapegoating. So that can be a real problem as well. And I do want to be absolutely clear that none of those questions are about your teams. This is probably much higher level in the organization. It's looking at the actual leadership decisions, the leadership capabilities, the leadership design of the system, and do the leaders even have feedback loops on the decisions they make, the impact they have on the organization, the impact they have on the outcomes of the business, and then bringing that feedback loop to change their assumptions that they built their entire premise of how the business functions, how the business is designed on. So that constraint is not your engineers. It's not the people doing the work that are the problem. Look at those 5 surfaces that I mentioned. I think everybody kind of recognized that they're part of the problem. And they're the result of that implication, that connection of your theory of business to your operating model. That's those surface areas that you need to look at and try and figure out how do we make those changes in the organization. And for somebody like myself who's consulting with organizations, I'm trying to figure out about how do I get to the people who can do something about it. That's the hard part for a lot of us, is that we go into organizations at a level that we can't, the people we're working with have no authority to make any of these changes, look at any of the things that I'm talking about. It's very difficult to find the actual buyer in the organization, the actual person that has decision authority to make some of these changes that we're talking about, to actually encourage people to look at the theory of business. You're talking generally about CFO, CEO, C-suite, getting in front of those folks, and it's very hard to do that, at least in my experience. But my background is engineering, so I'd call Sath if I want to talk to, a CEO, and get Sath to talk to them. So if you want to go deeper on some of the things that I've talked about, I feel like I'm much more articulate in my book. That's probably why I wrote it. But I have a website for the book, leadership-system.hinshelwood.com. I know that's long, but I'll put the link in the chat. And you can get it on Kindle. You can get it a physical paperback. Something like Sath likes ye old physical paperback. And you can also get a Leanpub version as well. That's what I built the book in. So hopefully that was useful. Is there questions? Because I can try and answer them.
Yeah, there's nothing in the chat. I don't know if anybody has any questions. We've got a bit of time. So firstly, thanks, Martin. It was very interesting as usual. I think you laid it out well in terms of the challenges we see and the systemic issues that we see in organizations, and they sadly are recurring. I think most of what you've described, many on the
But
call
they
I've
have to.
are certainly familiar. I've seen flavors of that.
I think they have to reoccur, and they will continue to reoccur until we address the fundamental problem, which is that mismatch of theory of business with the
Yeah.
operating model that we're selecting, or the things that we're selecting within the context of that operating model. And work like Marty Kagan's work on the product operating model, or even Scrum.org's somewhat failed attempt at an agile product operating model. They're great directions. But I think actually the agile product operating model from Scrum.org has done a little bit better job of pointing people at the surface areas that I'm talking about, pointing people at theory of business. But I think it's better to just call it out for what it is. Like it, it's a fundamental mismatch of assumptions that the business has made, right?
Yeah. Nice. Right, there's a couple of questions coming in now. I think I missed one. It's like problems is the first one. Yes, that is a question. I think Tom's keen to understand what is the most critical first step.
What's the most critical first step? I would try and get the organization to write down their assumptions. Like, what are your assumptions about how your business functions? What are your fundamental what's your theory of business as a business? And generally, you find, because they typically have not written it down. I know some organizations have, but typically they've not written it down. And every person on the leadership team will have a different idea about what the theory of business is. So they're all actually pulling in different directions, right? Just like, what do we do when we how do you start with a team figuring out how to make them better? Get them to write down their definition of workflow, right? And then you find the discrepancies, the differences between everybody's different assumptions, and you work to resolve them. And that's what we have to do at the organizational level as well. Get them to write down their assumptions. Yes, it's it's easy for me to say it, Tom, but it's not easy to get them to actually do it. That's the hard part, is getting them to actually do it or even recognize that they need to do it. I think a lot of organizations have recognized that they do and have done it. Microsoft, maybe Adobe, probably to a certain extent. Apple's probably pretty effective in this space, or at least they were in the past. There's lots of organizations that are doing very well, and they seem to have that alignment of what world do we live in and how do we run our business. But most organizations not. Um, Sessions asking about how these principles vary with company size, and they don't. You've the fundamental theory of business that I showed, that list of it's not specific to any business, any industry. It's straight out of Drucker's theory of business theories, I guess. Um, it applies across the board. They're generic enough that they apply across the board. But again, most organizations have not even looked at anything to do with it. Get
Does
them to
that
write their
help,
assumptions.
Sachin, does it? Yeah. I don't see Sachin
What
on my
was
screen.
that?
Yeah, sorry, it makes sense. And
Yeah.
I had to switch off my video because I had to change my clothes. I'm sorry about that, but this makes perfect
Well,
sense.
we're very glad you turned off your video.
No, I was just, yeah, I've gone to my pajamas now, so I don't think anybody wants to see my face anymore. But thank
Well,
So
you.
it's very honest of you.
the the
Sorry, too
the
much
thing
information.
the things that were on that list that you want to look at is does how does demand change for your business? Is it slow, or is it fast and unpredictable? Um, can work be specified up front, or does it emerge over time? Right? Is variability a defect, or is it information? How is variability in your industry? Because in traditional turn of the century manufacturing, variability was a defect that you had to get rid of, right? In software companies, it's probably very much on the other end, is that variability is information to do something with. That's part of your feedback loop, right? Um, does planning beat adaptation, or does feedback beat prediction? Two sides of that one. And then the last one is management optimizes throughput and controls deviation in the predictive model, and management design systems that learn in the adaptive model. So where do you currently sit? What's your current theory of business in your organization, and which side do you sit on? Right? I can put that in the chat. I can try and put that in the chat. Are you allowed to paste images these days in? Yeah, you can.
But
There
you
you go.
can, yeah, you can.
Yeah, you never used to be able to.
Things have moved on, my friend.
I know. Who knew that listening to your customers was a good idea? Who knew?
So just because I don't see any other questions, we do have a little bit of a time today and a bit of a gap, so that's kind of good. So obviously, this predictive adaptive thing is really where it's at.
Yeah.
And I think from a lot of our own experiences across different organizations, a lot of the organizations that are, to your point, successful, and I look at a lot of the big tech product companies, right? Who to be able to do what they do and to evolve into who they evolved into essentially required them to be much more adaptive. But I
Yes.
think a lot of us still work in organizations or experience organizations that are fundamentally or ultimately predictive, but they probably believe that they're a little bit more adaptive. So,
Well,
so, so, so helping organizations, I guess my question was, when you're doing what you're doing, and obviously this varies based on the context, but and I guess it's kind of related to Tom's question, but how do you go about quickly trying to help, hold the mirror up, help them to hold the mirror up so they can understand whether they're adaptive or predictive, but likely they're having problems because they're more predictive. If you get my point.
you you need to get them. It's difficult. You need to get them to see the mismatch,
Mm,
and they have to. They have. It has to be their idea. right? I mean, this is fundamental to working with leadership and management, is that it's very difficult to change their mind for them. That's kind of how they got there. And so some startups often start with an adaptive theory of business, right? And then over time, that atrophies because nobody is giving it any love, care, and attention. Nobody's actually closing the feedback loop anymore. Nobody is actually asking their customers anymore. I was in the room for a CEO. Was that no, it wasn't. It wasn't. Oh, I can't remember. I'm trying to remember what yeah, that left me. But the most startups start adaptive and then they build up organizational cruft over time. It cruft is just a word that means stuff, just things build up over time. A great example of that is Royal Bank of Scotland, right? Fifth biggest bank of the world in the world, one of the oldest banks in the world, one of the oldest companies in the world, and they have significant organizational craft. They have a lot of things that they would say that's the way things have to work. We're in a regulated industry and we have to work that way, but none of well, how can Monzo operate how they operate, right? Because they don't have any of that cruft. They didn't start with any of that cruft, and they're trying very hard to keep that cruft to an absolute minimum. It's technical debt, but in another form, right? It's organizational debt building up, and you need to practice continuous organizational hygiene in order to maintain that slick capability of your organization, and that's at any size, at any level. I do challenge go read and look at some of the stuff around Hire. They were a big traditional conglomerate, top down command and control organization, and they have completely renovated and adapted their entire process to more of a cell based customer comes first model, where the people that make the decisions in the organization are actually the people who are in direct contact with the customers. It's a real massive transformation across the entire organization, and that's they're building machines, right? It's not like they're building software; they're building physical machines, because the cost to them now is so much significantly higher than it always was before, because the world has become a faster and faster and faster place. And AI is exponent. This was before AI, but AI is now starting to exponentially accelerate that. And as organizations are able to take advantage of that, it's not just speed boost, because that kind of belies the problem. The organizations that are doing really well at AI are not the ones that are getting rid of employees in favor of AI. It's the ones that are doubling down on their employees. Right. A great example of that is IKEA. Recently, they shipped an AI chatbot that it turns out answered 90% of their customer service questions. Right? They were able to train it to answer 90% of the customer service questions. They're still hiring more customer service people than they were before, because those customer service people are now able to focus individually and explicitly on that 10% of problems that the AI can't solve. They got rid of all of the crap so they can focus on the real value to the customer, answering the real questions that the customer has. And they have happier customers because of it.
Yeah, I
Right? So
saw that. Yeah,
yeah, they didn't get. There's a few articles
yeah, there was.
around.
It was quite highly publicized because they obviously made some positive transformational gains through AI, but that wasn't at the cost of people. I
Yeah,
mean,
it
they
wasn't.
didn't suddenly have mass redundancy. They didn't let a single person go.
Yeah, it's AI should be taking a lot of the dross off the table, so you can focus on the thing that is your USP for your organization, is the thing that brings value to your organization. And coding, the code itself was never the thing that added value to the organization, right? It was the capability that the application, the result of the application was provided to your business or provided to your customer's business or provided to your customers in the B2C world. And AI compresses that execution, but that doesn't mean you can get rid of half your engineers. It means you need more engineers because you're going to be doing more stuff. You need more capability, more understanding, more things going on, and you grow that capability. It's not get rid of the people. I think that's the mistake that a lot of organizations have made, is that they've fired all their best people and replaced them with AI, and now they're like, oh shit, now we don't understand what the AI is doing. We don't understand how to do more stuff with the AI. We want to go to the next level, right? We got our chatbots, but now we want to use agents. Now we want to use this, and they've got nobody to build it because they get rid of people. It's just mental. It was always mental.
Agreed. Well said. Absolutely. So many highly publicized examples, right? Any other questions for Martin? We still have a little bit of time. If not, I'll start to wrap things up. I don't see anything else in the chat. If you do have a question, feel free to pop the virtual hand up, and we'll happy
I
let you come in.
asked my wife at the beginning for a copy of my book, and it just arrived.
There you go.
She's got the baby, so she's not looking at her phone.
I can jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
In the chat, you mentioned budgets as an example.
Yes.
Are our finance friends often kind of enforcers of the way things are done, or was that just one example amongst others?
So it's one example amongst others, but budgets, procurement, which they can be the same thing or they can be different depending on your organizational structure, right? So I would look at beyond budgeting for the budget question. I'd look at lean agile procurement for the procurement story. There are different ways of doing all of these things out there that companies are doing and are using and are getting huge benefit. A lot of the organizations that are getting huge benefit out are not standing in the battlements screaming that they're getting so much better out of it because they don't want to tip off their competitors, right? They're quite happy to just quietly be really good at this. So there's a bank in Germany that has adopted a model of cell-based delivery model. So every branch is its own business. It has what's it called? Its own ledger. I can't remember. They do all their own accounts. And if the central part of the business provides services to the branches, and the branches pay some of their pot of money to the overall business to provide those services, right? So if the overall business says we want to open a new branch, they have to go to the branches and say, we want to open a new branch here. Can you give us some money to go do that? Startup capital to go start up that branch. And if there's not enough money to start up that branch, that means that those branches don't have enough business to have another competing branch, right? So why would they offer up that money to be able to do that? It's just an example of the model and how it works, but that you're effectively taking the decisions of the business to next to where the customer is. The customer is walking into the branches, is dealing with the actual people there. So they created a model whereby that's where the control lies. The control lies with the people who are dealing with the customers. Richard Branson talks about that a lot as well as one of the ways he made. Sorry, yes, Tom. Oh, it would. Oh, you're waving like bye. Could be, yeah. He talks about it a little bit roundabout. You can find like his book and stuff's a little bit more detailed, but he talks about his job is taking care of the employees because the employees are the ones who take care of the customers. So he doesn't care about his customers. That's those folks' job. right? So he's not making decisions based on assumptions about what the customer needs. He's enabling the people who are working with the customer to make the decisions that make sense for the business. Does that make sense? And that's a kind of common thing that when you look at the difference in the theories of business, in the adaptive theory of business, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know all the things. This is what Agile was designed to try and the Agile Manifesto was fundamentally part of that story, right? We're doing all this upfront stuff, assuming a bunch of predictive things are going to happen, and we're wrong most of the time, and everybody's suffering for it. So how do we do it differently? And it's just unfortunate that it was focused solely on engineering and not actually focused at the entire organizational level. But it's a quotient of the people that were involved, right? They were focused on the engineering side of things. It's a huge missed piece, and you've got a bunch of folks in that space. You've got Simon Sinek, you've got folks trying to make changes at that level, but I don't know how much people just say, oh yeah, he does some cool videos, but don't actually listen to what's the difference between what he's saying and what we're doing. Does that make sense? Like, are we actually doing the things that would allow us to get this thing that these folks are talking about, or are we just pissing in the wind, for want of a better expression? And most of us are just pissing in the wind. It's really hard, because it's really hard for us as practitioners to get in those conversations with the people at that level, right? Because Agile is this thing for software and engineering and or maybe HR do it as well, but it's this thing for people doing work. It's not this thing for how you run your business. And yes, it fundamentally is this thing for how you run your business. You just have to think about it a little different. The most fun engagement I ever did was with the Ghana Police Service. So I went to Ghana in Africa, and I did Scrum training for police officers, line police officers, nothing to do with software. They had no software skills whatsoever. Line police officers in Ghana, and they were using Scrum as a mechanism for change in their organization. So the target of the scrums and the sprints was organizational change, not a product that they're offering. Does that make sense? Like, the product is the business. And that's ultimately what I'm saying when I say engineering is a leadership decision, a leadership system. Your organizational system needs engineered. And by engineering, I mean deliberate engineering. Look at what works. What are we building? Is it actually working? Is it actually providing the benefit we want? How are we measuring that benefit? And how do we change our underlying assumptions in order to make that work better? And most organizations are not doing that. And if they are doing it, it's kind of piecemeal and haphazard and depends who's in charge. It shouldn't depend on who's on charge. It should be evidence-based.
Good, good. There's one from Tom. I don't know if it's been answered, Tom, or if you're still wanting
I don't know, Tom.
Martin to expand on that. Yeah, come on in, Martin.
I'm just thinking I'm defining engineering here as I maybe not doing a good job of it, right? But as deliberately changing or altering something with measurements to get a good benefit. I guess I'm adapting engineering to suit what I'm trying to say, right? Because my background is engineering, so that's my default. But yeah, just any engineer working on any product ever has an adaptive model. You got to try something and see if it works, and if it doesn't work, you try something new, and you keep trying till you get the outcome you want, whether it's powering your mill, right, or the steam engine, or any of these things were all engineered. The wheel itself was an engineering outcome. So maybe engineering is, like, I'm using the old word, not the new word. Maybe, I don't know. I'm trying my best, Tom.
I'm just quite keen what Tom thinks about that. since we have a little bit of time, and then I think I'll wrap up after this because you've admirably as ever covered off a whole bunch of questions, but you've also expanded on some of your ideas and why you're viewing it the way you are. What do you make of Tom's answer? What do you make of Martin's answer there, Tom? You happy with that? You got any thoughts yourself? You're on mute, Tom.
Yeah, because I had three people in the room talking in the background. uh, there's a guy called Billy V. Cohen, Koen, University of Austin, Texas, who wrote books trying to probe and find out what engineering was. He thought very deeply about it. I highly recommend the videos that exist and his books. But he came up with the conclusion that I paraphrased and used in some of my books. It was trying to solve difficult problems, so not too far off from Martin here, by means of what he called, what was it? I use the word principles. He used another word, but it doesn't matter. In other words, there's some fundamental principles like suck it and see or something like that. But so the engineers have a set of principles that enable them to work on hard problems. And he was, and I'm a big fan of principles. I have like 100 principles in some of my books and that kind of thing. So I'm fanatic on it. But now what I'm worried about, and I'm not worried after hearing Martin's answer from him, but there's so many people in Silicon Valley that simply mean coding and programming and nothing else. And that worries me.
That's our problem with the word developers as well, right? I mean, I fundamentally, one of the things I always say in training when I'm asked about that is that my father was a property developer. He didn't know how to code, but still uses the word developer, right? And he had a property development team, and none of them knew how to code, and they all had to work together to get to the outcome that they were trying to get to. Right? There's a lot of words that I think have been it's like the word technical as well, Tom. I struggle with that one too. Because when I say technical competence, if you're a product manager, you should have technical competence. I don't mean you should be able to code, but everybody immediately assumes it means that you have to be able to code. But no, it means you need to be technically competent in the domain with which that you're operating. And that has nothing to do with coding or software or engineering. It could be to do with, I don't know, insurance, right? I guess people just use the word expert these days, but yeah, I don't think that does enough.
One of my least favorite words.
Which one? Expert?
Yeah.
Next discussion, definition of expert.
Yes, we'll do that. We'll do that the next session. We'll weave that into the Q&A.
I know something you don't, Tom. That's my definition of expert.
What's this? The benefit of principles.
I'm pretty sure I don't think Tom doesn't, but yes.
Right, I think that's a good place to start wrapping up. Got quite a few questions. Right, yes, I'll start to draw it to a close. But firstly, yeah, Martin, thanks again. Really enjoyed your session. I think it's thought-provoking, and I'm sure it will encourage me to pick your book up again. The tomb that it is. We encourage everyone to grab themselves a copy. We have shared the URL in the chat. So if you don't like physical copies, I do also have lots of ebooks, but I do like physical copies of things so I can carry them around and pick them off the coffee table,
That's the wrong one, Richard. You need this one. I'm just joking. You don't need that one.
So yes, there's lots of great stuff in there, and a lot of the ideas I think will resonate with you. I think many of us are in roles and working in organizations where we are trying desperately to effect change, but change can only really meaningfully be truly affected at a systemic kind of level, and that's a lot of kind of what Martin's touching on through that particular lens. So yeah, great session. Thanks again, and thank you all for joining. Couple updates for you if you haven't seen them already. We've already got a lot of the remaining events for the 2026 program up and in Meetup now. So do please check those out. So there's quite a lot of good stuff coming up. Next month we'll be hosting Mark Stringer. Donald and I actually went along to Mark's Fringe. So if you don't know what the Fringe is, it's the Edinburgh Festival. It's one of the festivals of the Edinburgh Festival family. and it's the largest arts festival in the world. Edinburgh hosts it every year, and millions of people come to our fair city. It's a fantastic experience. So Mark's been doing a new show, and it's really about his experience and journey writing a book. And he'll be here next month talking about ideas from that very book, which is actually about software project management, his experiences. So I think he was very quick to point out early in his show that there probably aren't going to be many shows at the festival where the focus is project management, and I'm pretty sure he's right. So if you're interested in that, come along. It was very entertaining. Mark's got a very fun and engaging, relaxed style, so we look forward to hosting him. We're also in talks with Jenny Martin, who some of you may know, who is doing a lot of work with her new framework, Oopsie, which she's been working on for many years, but she's developed that a lot over recent times, is shortly about to release her book. Also has some supporting workshops and other related events. So we're looking forward to hosting Jenny as well. And if you haven't seen it hot off the presses, we've just published our end of year finale, which will be with none other than Dr. Julian Stodd, who's also a past guest, much like our good friend Martin. And Julian will join us to share ideas from his latest book. He's also published many books, much like our good friend Tom. And his latest one is a fascinating read. I'm also reading that one, as is Donald, which really takes a look at the way in which the whole landscape is frankly changing, from our place and our environments, our sense of belonging, and various other related adjacent kind of ideas. And it's really more of a philosophical piece. So Julian's going to come along and bring that to life for us in the context of organizations. What does that mean within our ever-changing, fast-changing workplaces, and what could we and should we expect from leaders in terms of being able to adapt to that? So not dissimilar ideas to some of the ideas that Martin's presented today. So we think that'll be a fascinating way to close the year. So if that sounds interesting to you, jump on the meetup and book your place before they all disappear. And we look forward to seeing you then. Also, just as a reminder, everyone, wherever you happen to be, we're long-term supporters of the Lean Agile Scotland conference. That's in October this year, so I'm sure there'll still be some remaining places for that. So if you're in or around the Edinburgh area or Central Belt in Scotland or whatever, or you can make the trip to Edinburgh in October and would like to learn at that particular conference, then we highly recommend it as community supporters of that conference. And I think that's just about it. So I'm gonna close off there and stop to catch my breath. But thanks again to all of you for attending. We hope you got great value out of it. We'll have the recording out over the next few days. Martin, I don't know if you're happy to share the deck. If you are, we're happy to circulate one. Yeah, we can do that too. Some people like the supporting slides, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you all at other future sessions. So thanks again, and enjoy the remainder of your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be. So thanks again for joining, folks. Thank you.